Somewhere in your bathroom right now, there's a product with a warning label you've never actually read. You trust it anyway, because it's on a store shelf, because a brand you recognize sells it, because surely someone, somewhere, would have stopped it if it weren't safe. 100 years ago, women had that exact same blind trust in a product sold right next to the toothpaste. The label made the same promise yours does: perfectly harmless. The active ingredient was arsenic. And women didn't just buy it once, they ate it daily, for years, some for their entire adult lives. This wasn't a scam that fooled a few desperate people. It was one of the biggest beauty trends of the 19th century, sold openly, marketed by actual doctors, and defended by the women who used it, even as it was killing them. This is the story of how a deadly poison became a beauty staple for 100 years, and why almost nobody stopped to ask why. To understand why arsenic made sense to Victorian women, you have to understand what beautiful actually meant in the 1800s. It wasn't tanned skin, it wasn't rosy good health, it was the opposite. The single most desirable trait a woman could have was skin so pale it was almost translucent. Why? Because pale skin meant something specific about your life. It meant you had never worked outdoors. Field labor, factory work, farm work, all of it left visible tan lines and weathered skin. A pale complexion was a walking advertisement that you were wealthy enough to stay indoors, wrapped in parasols and long gloves, doing nothing more strenuous than needlepoint. But there was a second, darker layer to this obsession, and it's the one most people don't know. In the late 1700s and into the 1800s, tuberculosis, what doctors at the time called consumption, became so common among the upper classes that its symptoms got quietly rebranded as beautiful. Sufferers grew thin. Their skin turned pale and almost glassy, their cheeks flushed with fever. Their eyes looked large and glossy from illness. Instead of recognizing this as a wasting disease, wealthy society romanticized it. Poets described dying women as ethereal. Painters gave healthy models the same gaunt, luminous look. Being delicate, fragile, and slightly unwell became fashionable because it looked like tuberculosis, and tuberculosis had somehow become glamorous. So women were chasing two things at once: the paleness of never having to work and the fragile glow of a disease that was, at the time, killing roughly 1 in 7 people in Europe. That's the cultural backdrop arsenic walked into. Women weren't just vain. They were trying to visually manufacture the look of wealth and the look of romantic fragility, using whatever tools were available. And in the 1800s, one of the most effective tools for turning your skin pale, thin, and luminous was a poison that was sitting on pharmacy shelves completely legally. The advertising copy for these wafers is almost unbelievable to read today. They promise to erase freckles, blackheads, pimples, vulgar redness, and what one ad called yellow or muddy skins. And they explicitly told customers the product was safe. One ad used the exact phrase, perfectly harmless. At the time, doctors already knew arsenic was a poison. It had been a go-to murder weapon for centuries precisely because it was so lethal, and, until a chemical test was developed earlier in the 1800s, nearly undetectable in a body after death. Everyone in Victorian society knew arsenic could kill you. That knowledge didn't stop the wafers from selling. If anything, the manufacturers leaned into a strange logic. A small enough dose, taken carefully, wouldn't kill you outright. It would just change your skin. And in a narrow, horrifying sense, they were right. Arsenic actually does something specific to the human body at sublethal doses. It damages the capillaries just under the skin, which can produce that pale, waxy, almost translucent look women were chasing. It's not a trick of marketing. Arsenic genuinely alters the way skin looks. The problem is what it does everywhere else in the body at the same time. So by the turn of the century, you had a fully normalized beauty product, sold through mainstream retail, endorsed by doctors, marketed as safe, and culturally reinforced by stories of far-off arsenic eaters who seem to handle it just fine. Here's where the story turns. Because arsenic doesn't just sit quietly in your body doing one polite cosmetic thing. It's a systemic poison, and long-term exposure causes damage that stacks up over months and years. The nervous system takes damage first, often invisibly. Numbness, tingling, weakness. The kidneys, which are working overtime trying to filter the poison out of the bloodstream, slowly deteriorate. Hair begins to fall out in patches. And the skin, the exact thing women were trying to improve, starts to develop something called arsenical keratosis. Thickened, wart-like growths, often on the palms and soles, along with dark, blotchy hyperpigmentation, completely different from the porcelain glow they were promised. Some long-term users developed vitiligo, patches where the skin loses pigment entirely, leaving blotchy white patches against darker, damaged skin. In other words, the cure for an uneven complexion could, with prolonged use, produce one of the most uneven complexions imaginable. And there's a cruel mechanical detail buried in all of this. Arsenic is mildly addictive in the sense that the body builds tolerance to it. Regular users needed slightly more over time to get the same visible effect. That meant the safe daily dose wasn't a fixed number. It was a moving target that kept climbing, for a product whose entire safety claim rested on staying within a narrow, low dose in the first place. Doctors of the era weren't entirely blind to this. Medical journals throughout the late 1800s documented cases of what they sometimes called arsenic face. Patients showing up with skin damage, gastrointestinal problems, and neurological symptoms that traced directly back to cosmetic arsenic use. But this evidence competed against a much louder, much better funded voice, the advertisers, who had every financial incentive to keep telling women the wafers were harmless. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's not just a quirky historical footnote, it's a pattern. A product sold on a promise of safety, contradicted by mounting medical evidence, kept alive by advertising dollars and cultural momentum, until the harm became too obvious to ignore. It happened with arsenic. It would happen again, decades later, with radium, with cigarettes, with a dozen other products history eventually had to walk back. Arsenic's reach into Victorian beauty and daily life went far beyond a tin of wafers. And this is the part most people never learn. A specific arsenic-based pigment called Sheila's green, later refined into what was sold as Paris green, produced one of the most vivid, popular green dyes of the entire century. It ended up dyeing dance dresses, artificial flowers worn in women's hair, gloves, and even children's toys. Women wearing these gorgeous emerald gowns to balls were, in some documented cases, shedding arsenic dust off the fabric with every movement, inhaling it, absorbing it through sweat-dampened skin, all night, on repeat, ball after ball. The same pigment covered the walls of thousands of homes as wallpaper. Damp climates allowed mold to interact with the arsenic-laced dye, releasing toxic gas directly into bedrooms where families slept for years without knowing why they kept getting sick. And separately from beauty products entirely, arsenic was also a common household poison, used for killing rats, sold at any general store, easy to obtain, and, notoriously, one of the most popular tools for actual murder in the era. Which means Victorian society was simultaneously terrified of arsenic as a murder weapon in the newspapers, while cheerfully eating it as a skincare routine at the vanity table. Nobody seemed to connect those two facts out loud. The arsenic beauty era didn't end with one dramatic moment. It faded the way most dangerous trends do, slowly, under the weight of mounting evidence, shifting fashion, and, eventually, regulation. Medical understanding of chronic arsenic poisoning improved through the early 1900s, and public health advocates started publishing case studies that were harder to dismiss. At the same time, fashion itself moved on. The tubercular, wasting-away aesthetic of the mid-1800s gradually gave way to healthier-looking, more robust beauty standards by the early 20th century. A trend built partly on a specific, era-bound idea of fragile beauty couldn't survive once that ideal changed. Government regulation caught up eventually too, as food and drug oversight expanded through the early 20th century and put an end to openly selling poison as a cosmetic wafer with a perfectly harmless label. But it's worth noting, arsenic-based cosmetics didn't vanish instantly with some single new law. Products like Campbell's wafers reportedly stayed on some shelves well into the 20th century before finally disappearing for good. So the next time you see a beauty product with a bold safety claim in tiny print on the label, it's worth remembering. Victorian women had that exact same reassurance. Perfectly harmless, printed right there on the box. Sold in the biggest retail catalog in America. Recommended by doctors. Worn to balls. Eaten like candy. And it was killing them the entire time. The uncomfortable question this leaves behind isn't really about arsenic at all. It's about how many perfectly harmless claims we're trusting right now. The ones we won't be able to see clearly until we're the ones looking back, a century from now, asking why anyone believed them.